In the first part of What to Produce topic, we explored different ways of thinking about what to produce considering demand for goods and services. One approach builds on the idea of the budget set, which is helpful to understand what bundle of products consumers prefer based on their preferences, habits, and interests. The other focus on how much the product costs and willingness of customers to pay for such a good or service. In combination, they give us a detailed understanding of how to identify the demand for your product, what you should produce to be actual and demanded, and earn as much as possible in your market conditions. By the end of this section, you'll be able to know how to identify possible types of product you can produce depending on available income of clients, their desires, economic situation in the market, price levels of goods and services, and satisfaction level of purchasing next unit of product by customers. It is quite logical that lower prices make people consume more. Let's imagine you're asked the following question in a survey. What is the maximum amount you would be willing to pay for one chocolate bar? In answering this question, you should not worry about what would be a reasonable price for a chocolate bar. You should simply decide how much chocolate bar you want. For example, you might think that you would really like to have at least one chocolate bar, so you would be willing to pay up to 600 tenge for one bar. That's you would be happier with one more chocolate bar. This is your valuation of one chocolate bar. Now, we ask you some more questions. What is the maximum amount that you would be willing to pay for 2 chocolate bars or 3 chocolate bars? Perhaps you decide you would be willing to pay 1,000 tenge for 2 bars, 1,200 tenge for 3 bars, and so on. Your valuation is increasing. You always like having more chocolate bars because more is better. We know you would be willing to pay an additional 400 tenge for second chocolate bar. Similarly, if you have 2 chocolate bars, you would be willing to pay an additional 200 tenge for third bar, and so forth. We call the change in your valuation your marginal valuation. The change in your valuation gets smaller as you obtain more chocolate bars. This is called diminishing marginal valuation, meaning the more chocolate bars you already have, the less you are willing to pay for an additional one. In other words, an individual's valuation of some quantity of a product is the maximum amount the individual would be willing to pay to obtain that quantity. The lower the price, the higher the demand. It means that if you want to produce demanded product, you have to produce highly valued product with the lowest level of prices possible. It should secure a lot of earnings, profit. But we cannot actually get to see people's marginal valuations. We observe what people actually do. To see our theory in action, we can look at customers' budget observation. For example, the data of Committee of Statistics of the Republic of Kazakhstan as for January of 2018 on how an average resident of country spends his income, on what products and in what amount per product. Consumer expenditures of average person in Kazakhstan for 2018 are given in the table. You can see that on average, consumers spend more than 57% of their budget on necessities like utilities and food, and other 43% on non-necessity goods. What does it show? As customers visit stores at different times, they're certainly paying attention to the price changes of goods and services. At the same time, the income may also change from one month to the next. So, if we were to look at their budget set monthly, we would commonly find it changing from one month to the next. Let's consider our case, where there are two goods, necessities and non-necessity goods, and that average person do no selling. We will describe his demand for non-necessity goods like that. Given prices and your income, you pick the best point on the budget line, as we did in previous video lectures. One way to explain this point is that it shows us how many non-necessity goods you will buy, given your income and given the price of necessity and non-necessity goods. Using this as a reference point, we now ask how his choice will change as income changes, and then as the price of non-necessity goods changes. Imagine that his income increases. This graph shows what happens to the budget line. Higher the income means that he can afford to buy more necessities and more non-necessity goods, so the budget line shifts outward. The slope of the budget line is unchanged because there is no change in the price of necessities relative to non-necessity goods. What happens to his consumption of non-necessity goods? There are two possibilities. The increase in income leads him to consume either more non-necessity goods or fewer non-necessity goods. Both are probable, and either is possible. Of course, you might also buy exactly the same amount as before. We might think that the more normal case is that higher income would lead bigger non-necessity goods consumption. If a good has a feature that he will purchase more of it when he have higher income, we call it a normal good. The good example of that is using the service of taxi driver instead of public transport. Purchase of clothes from trade shop rather than in second-hand shops. In some cases, higher income leads to lower consumption. For example, suppose he is surviving for a minimum wage of 28,284 tenge on a diet consisting of mostly instant noodles. When he changed the job and has higher income, he can afford better things to eat. So he will probably consume a smaller quantity of instant noodles, and we call such products like inferior goods. If a specific product exists in different qualities, for example, cheap versus expensive vegetables in Magnum stores, for example, or low-salt butter products or original butter, we easily understand that low-quality salt is an inferior good. Product might be normal for one consumer and inferior for another one. More exactly, we say that good is inferior if higher income leads to lower consumption. Also, one more type of normal good: if you spend a larger portion of your income on a specified type of good, as your income increases, then we say that the good is a luxury good. Another way of saying this is that for a luxury good, the percentage increase in consumption is bigger or higher than the percentage increase in income. Examples: BMW, car accessories, sport tickets for example, on basketball game, some brand cosmetics or some brand of clothes. We can use these ideas in terms of the income elasticity of demand, which is a measure of how sensitive demand is to changes in income. For an inferior good, the income elasticity of demand has a negative sign. Higher the income leads lower consumption. For normal good, the income elasticity of demand is positive. For luxury goods, the income elasticity of demand is larger than 1. The difference between these different kinds of goods are important for managers of firms to make sales forecasts and to know what products they are selling or going to produce. normal, inferior, or luxury goods. Firms that sell inferior goods make a profit when the economy as a whole in a recession, crisis situation, and vice versa. On the contrary, firms selling luxury goods will make less or no profit when the economy as a whole in a poor conditions. Now consider what happens if there is a change in price of non-necessity goods. If the price decreases, let's analyze what will happen in our case. It seems intuitive that lower prices lead people to consume more. There are two reasons why it works this way. Firstly, if non-necessity goods decrease in price, it becomes more cheap relative to necessities. Second, a decrease in the price of non-necessity goods also means that you can afford more everything, including non-necessity goods. Based on the idea of law of demand, we can construct your individual demand curve for non-necessity goods. We do so by drawing the budget set for each different price of non-necessity goods, seeing how much you buy, and then plotting this date on putting the price good on the vertical axis and the quantity demand on the horizontal axis. For example, we might find that consumers' purchase of non-necessity goods, say cosmetics, looks like those in table as shown here. If we plot these points on a graph and then fill in the gaps, we get a diagram. This is your demand curve for cosmetics goods. It shows how many cosmetics you would consume at any given price. The law of demand means that we expect this curve to slope downward. If prices increases, you would less buy. If the price decreases, you buy more. For example, if the price of non-necessity goods decrease from 4 to 3, then as shown in the table, the quantity demanded increases from, for example, 3 bars to 4 units. The demand curve doesn't change. We simply move from one point on the line to another. If change in anything other than price of non-necessity goods causes you to change your consumption of that good, then there is a shift in the demand curve. For instance, suppose you get a salary rise at your job, so you have more income. As long as non-necessity good is a normal good, this increase in income will cause your demand curve for non-necessity good to shift outward. This means that at any given price, you will buy more of the good when income increases. In the case of inferior good, an increase in income will cause the demand curve to shift inward. You will buy less of the good when income increases. We illustrate these two cases in these two graphs. So what did we learn? Before making a decision on what to produce, first companies have to know in what economic condition they are functioning and what goods will be in demand and bring them profit. Then they define the type of demanded product, which could be determined by sensitivity of consumers' demand for these price and income changes of goods and services. Also, the optimal choice of consumer has taken into account minimization of expenses at the set of goods, which maximizes the happiness level of buying this set by consumers at the given budget.